All right, good afternoon. Today at Google, we're delighted to welcome Mr. Grant Faulkner. Mr. Faulkner is an American writer, the executive director of National Novel Writing Month, and the co-founder of the online literary journal 100 Word Story. Joining him on stage is Anthony Francis, Google's very own, who works on the brain robotics team at Google. They will be discussing on stage Mr. Faulkner's new book, Pep Talks for Writers, 52 Insights and Actions to Boost Your Creative Mojo. Please join me in welcoming to Google, Mr. Grant Faulkner.
Thanks, David. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's great to see you.
Well, welcome to Google. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you write, and how you got involved with Nano.
Yeah. Maybe I'll back up. I'm going to ask, how many people here have done National Novel Writing Month? Okay. We got 3 people, 4 people. I am very curious if anyone's done it more times than Anthony has. He's nearing 1 million words right now for his whole NaNoWriMo career. He started in 2002. Has anyone done it that long? Okay, me included. But I want to tell, maybe just for those of you who don't know what National Novel Writing Month is, I'll just describe it to you. And I want Anthony to also give his take on what it is, because everyone has a different sort of entry point to it. It was founded in 1999 by this guy named Chris Beatty in Berkeley. And Chris basically, it might not have been this suddenly, but he woke up one morning and kind of literally decided, I want to write a novel. I mean, he was an active reader, a lover of language, but he hadn't read any how to write books. He hadn't taken any writing workshops. He just wanted to write a novel, and he figured the best way to do it was to write. And that's what I always tell people. If you want to learn to write a novel, the best way is to actually sit down and write one. It's just such a big, crazy experience that you have to experience it firsthand. But anyway, Chris, so he looked at his bookshelves, and he picked out some of the more slender volumes. So think of something about the size of Catcher in the Rye. And he did a rough estimate, and they came up with 50,000 words was a kind of like the lowest edge of a novel, lowest word count. And he did some very sophisticated math and figured out that if you could write a novel in a month if you wrote 1,677 words a day. I'll round up to 1,700. And Chris recruited about 20 of his friends to write with him. And they met in coffee shops after work, and they would do these interesting challenges. They would, for instance, challenge each other through word sprints, which we still do during NaNoWriMo, and the person who would write the most words would get a prize. So they'd write for 5 minutes. And the person who won might get a latte. And then, very Pavlovian in its roots, NaNoWriMo. And then they do this other kind of Pavlovian technique that you can't go to the bathroom until you've written 1,000 words. And after the latte and after other beverages, this is the single best writing motivational technique in the world. So if you're ever behind and on deadline, drink a lot of coffee and then don't let yourself go to the bathroom until you've written 1,000 words. But anyway, the reason I tell this story is one, I think a lot of people don't realize their creative potential or pursue their creative dreams because they put obstacles in front of themselves. And so one way that Chris did this was he said, I don't have to take a writing workshop to learn to write a novel, I can just do it. And meeting in cafes with his friends also built in, we're essentially, this is what NaNoWriMo is. It's a community. It's a one part event, one part community. And the community part is really important because they held each other accountable. So if someone didn't show up for, now we call them write-ins, somebody might give them a call the next day and say, are you still working on your novel? Are you still making progress? And so the whole premise of it is that you don't have to have an MFA to be a writer. You're a writer by writing. That's the definition. And that also we say that everyone has a story to tell. And this is actually true, or true enough. I read a survey in the New York Times recently. 81% of Americans say they want to write a book someday. But most of them don't do it. And that's why we exist. We say, if you're going to write a book someday, those things that you say you're going to do someday, they rarely happen. Have you ever noticed that? Usually we're waiting for that kind of perfect expanse of time and that perfect place to do it. But the perfection, it never arrives. So that's part of the premise of NaNoWriMo is like, make your creative dreams happen today and write 50,000 words in November. And we've expanded our program since then. We have a Camp NaNoWriMo program that happens in April and July. It's a more casual version of NaNoWriMo. I wrote a novel, Now What, in January and February, where we focus on revision and publishing. And then we have this huge program called the Young Writers Program, where 80,000 kids and teens sign up to write a novel. When I was going to high school, kids didn't even think about writing a novel. It was like something that adults did. So I'm really proud of that program. Yeah.
So,
and Anthony has done it since 2002. How would you describe NaNoWriMo?
so it's really interesting the stuff that you listed, because I've been writing on and off for over 30 years, and with the exception of a short story, I'd never gotten things published. And I had read all the writing books that I could find. I took off a summer to finish a novel once. I tried to prioritize my writing. I went to 80% time at the company I was at to try to give myself more time for writing, and then they started eating into that, so I switched companies to another place where I could do that. I went to a writing workshop at DragonCon, and none of these things really helped me get what I wanted, because they were focusing on things like creating, improving my technique, or creating space in my life. They weren't focusing on the right problem, which was writing, actually focusing on the writing. And at that writing workshop, I heard about National Novel Writing Month, and I tried it, and I got 50,000 words into a novel, and I was overjoyed, and I had the intent of following up on it, and some stuff happened in my life, so that didn't happen. But a few years later, I met another community of writers that were focused on writing. It was a writing group, but not a critique group. It was like, we get together, we write, we read what we wrote, but nobody critiques, right? This is just to hear the words. Mm-hmm. And they were involved in Nano, and that brought me back into it. And that really had a spark, because instead of focusing on technique, instead of focusing on how do I create space, I'm sitting here going, people that have day jobs did not take off a month to succeed at Nano. They just did it. Mm-hmm. And that broke my mindset that I had to create space, or I had to perfect my technique. And some of my very best writing has come out of this, because you think through your plot, you know that you've got your magical tattoo artist in the second Nano I had, and she's about to go to a warehouse, W-E-R-E, House of Werewolves. And I suddenly realized, well, I've written this into my plot, and I have no idea what actually happens there. I know what happens next, but not what happens there. And I had to step off into space or miss my word count. And I ended up writing a whole scene I never anticipated, and characters that pushed their way into the book and refused to leave. And now I'm writing a young adult series about this spin-off character that came entirely through the door opened by Nano. But another part is that community. And even if you're just going onto the website or talking with friends about Nano, that's really important. I have attempted Nano 20 times, counting Nano, Script Frenzy, and Camp Nano. Mm-hmm. I have failed twice. And my failures were when I decided, I'm just going to do Nano on a month by myself without the support of the whole community. And 10,000 words in, it just died, because I didn't have that fear that I'm not going to be able to submit my word count at the end of the month, and I'm not going to get that little Viking hat graphic.
It's very, you want to get the Viking hat graphic. That's what most people are working for.
I have an actual Viking hat somewhere in my house when you were still giving. I don't know if you still do or not, but
we do. We'll get you more Viking hats.
I don't need any more Viking hats. I don't have any place to store them. Yeah. But it's been the community is just as important. So
I totally agree. I think that's actually part of the reason I wrote this book, is I talked to so many writers, and they would find their creative home with NaNoWriMo in November, and find themselves as writers. And they would have full intention of going beyond NaNoWriMo to write year-round. Yet they'd have problems about that. Like in some ways, I mean, it does feel like the whole world is writing with you in November. And throughout the month of November, hashtag NaNoWriMo is trending. And Anthony mentioned the forums online. We get like 1 million forums posts in the month of November. So literally every writing topic under the sun is talked about. But I do think it's like NaNoWriMo is this great opportunity to make your creativity a priority during the month of November. And I think as we get older, creativity has a way of falling lower and lower on our list. There's this great quote from Picasso who says that every child is born an artist. The challenge is how to be an artist as an adult, and I bet we all feel that here. And so I think, but I think it's really important to make creativity a priority every month, no matter if you want to be a best-selling author or if you just like writing. And so that's what this book is all about. The 52 essays, not a coincidence with the 52, one per week.
Well, it's interesting you say this about making sure that we stay creative. But for some people, like, they have more stories in their head than they can put down on page, and they just need to carve out some time to do it or give themselves permission to do it. Yeah. Other people want to write, but then they get there, and then there's that page, and they're like, I just don't know what to write. I don't know, or I know I want to write, but I can't come up with the right words. So how do you spark that creativity? Like you've got the desire, but sometimes you just seem to run dry. What do you do to spark your creativity? What are some techniques that you recommend?
There are a lot of them. I'm gonna talk about one. I'm gonna read a little bit from the book here. One of the things that I think holds people back from being creative is there's this notion of inspiration. And I'll hear people say, well, I don't write because I'm not, or I wait for inspiration to strike before I write. And so here's a little take on inspiration that I think might help people write. Inspiration is a funny thing. It's powerful enough to move mountains. When it strikes, it carries an author forward like the rushing torrents of a flooded river. And yet, if you wait for it, nothing happens. The irony is that so much is actually created, mountains moved, sagas written, grand murals painted, by those who might not even describe themselves as particularly inspired. Instead, they show up every day and put their hands on the keyboard, their pen to paper, and they move their stories forward bit by bit, word by word, perhaps not even recognizing that inspiration is striking in hundreds of tiny, microscopic ways as they push through another sentence, another page, another chapter. I write when the Spirit moves me, and the Spirit moves me every day, said William Faulkner. No relation. This is the principle. I wish there was. This is the principal way writers finish 50,000 words of a novel each year during National Novel Writing Month, by showing up. And it applies to being creative the rest of the year as well. Inspiration is often characterized as a thunderbolt, a brilliant flash that strikes from the heavens, a eureka moment, and that metaphor certainly holds truth because inspiration can be a sudden igniting force, random and illuminating and otherworldly, and even a bit dangerous. Yet I think of inspiration, at least the big gobsmacking moments of inspiration, as more like Bigfoot. Sightings of Bigfoot are rare, and he's so elusive that he can't be captured physically or even truly on film, so his very existence is in question. It's wonderful to believe that he exists because it's nice to think the world is strange and beautiful enough to spawn such a creature. But if you go out into the woods and look for Bigfoot, you're not likely to find him, just as you can't force sweeping gusts of inspiration to appear on any given day. The muse of Greek mythology, that creature depicted in a beautiful flowing gown playing a harp, was invoked by authors to sing stories into their ears. But I'd like to recast this muse. The muse doesn't sing the words of a story to you. The muse is conjured in the telling, in overcoming those lulls that strike with willpower, grit, and as much caffeine as it takes. I see the muse as hundreds of invisible sprites that sleep in the whispery spaces between each word. These sprites are enlivened only by the breath of a churning imagination, by the stirrings of a story moving forward. Such a muse is ineffable, so miniature that she often goes unnoticed, yet an author must trust that the responsibility for bringing those story sprites to life resides in creating a spool of words that spin onto the page. A writer is either compelled to write or not, said Toni Morrison. If I waited for inspiration, I wouldn't really be a writer. The urge to wait for inspiration has killed many a wonderful story. And I'm going to end with the Toni Morrison quote there because Toni Morrison, I don't know if you know this story, but when she wrote her first novel, she was a single working mom in New York City. And she, worked all day like us, busy job, came home, took care of her kids, got them to bed, and she had about 15 minutes of the day left to her. But she used that 15 minutes, not her prime creative time, not when her mind is like super fresh and imaginative, but in those 15 minutes, she wrote every day, and that she built a novel by tiny increments. And so I feel like this is a lesson for us all about what you can build just through a daily practice. And if she'd been waiting for inspiration, she'd still be waiting to write that novel, and she's moved on past that. So I really do think and this is why, and Anthony and I will get to this, why in many ways I don't believe in writer's block. I feel like we tell ourselves we have a block, but if you just sit down and put words on the page, you'll solve that block, because other words like to follow.
Yeah, wow. There's so much I want to follow up there. I think that lightning bolt of inspiration, and as a cognitive scientist, we have this feeling that things come into consciousness all at once, or not at all. Like you see something or you don't. Yet there's these perceptual processes that are churning in the background all the time. And inspiration is kind of like perceiving your own idea space, where it congeals and you're seeing this idea that you've had. But if you aren't feeding your brain with all these thoughts and ideas and trying to progress step by step, it's like the muse can't set sail unless you have already filled the ocean with your tears of hard work.
I love
right.
This.
So I think it's really critical. But then the Toni Morrison quote, it strikes me. I went to a writer's workshop with Walter John Williams as one of the instructors, and he had us do an exercise, and he had us all get together and write for 30 minutes on whatever our favorite writing implement was. And at the end of that, he asked us to do a word count, and the word count of people was everywhere from 250 to I think 1,200, because some people are very fast. and the average was around, I can't remember the number, 300 or 500 words. And he said, okay, if you did that, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, that's a novel, that's a career. And his point to us is that we don't really have an excuse, and this is a science fiction workshop. His point that we don't really have an excuse not to be a writer, because it can be done, at least in the writing part, 30 minutes a day. Maybe not the editing, but if you have the text, you can edit it. If you don't, you can't. And that goes back to that. So let's talk a little bit about. I want to come back to writer's block, but let's talk a little bit about the creating the practice of writing. How a lot of people, like even for me, I have done Nano forever. I've written many novels, and I still struggle to maintain a practice where I am writing at the speed and rate that I want to finish my books before I die.
we all have too many books in us, I think. Mm-hmm. We'll never get the books I want to read read or written, unfortunately. I just wanted to go back a little bit per the writer's block, to the story that you did about a half an hour a day. When I mentioned word sprints during NaNoWriMo, which is basically giving people a prompt and telling them to write for 5 or 10 minutes. And per what Anthony said, in 5 minutes, I've never encountered, at least people on the laptop, people write at least 200 words. Even like people who classify themselves as non-writers, which I don't think exists. Everyone's a writer. But it's the same thing. It's that idea that even if it's a rough draft and you write 200 words a day or 300 words a day, 300 words a day is like 10,000 words a month. That's 120,000 words a year. That's a huge novel, perhaps 2 novels. And again, it might be a rough draft, but the point is like, for me, writing the rough draft is the hardest thing for me. I hate rough drafts. That's actually what NaNoWriMo delivered me from, is it helped me get through my rough drafts. I called myself a precious, ponderous writer beforehand, because I would sit and make the first sentence or the first paragraph or the first chapter perfect before I moved on, which was entirely the wrong approach to writing a novel, because that first chapter is likely going to get cut in revision or rewritten anyway. So the premise in that, I feel like I didn't just describe this quite as well as I should have earlier, but it's getting the rough draft out. And the thing is like that when we measure, so many people, the one obstacle they put in front of themselves in a rough draft is that their words in their rough draft don't match their favorite author's words. And in the end, what we don't realize is that our favorite authors have written these crappy rough drafts. We just don't get to see them. We only get to see the drafts that have been revised maybe 8 or 10 times and edited by a professional editor. So it's really about like getting the words on the page, and then you can edit them. And now I've forgotten the great question you just asked me because I was backtracking.
We'll come back to it. I just, about writer's block. I heard a number of people say, writer's block doesn't exist. I mean, I can show you half a dozen books that are out there. This is the writer's block myth. Half a dozen books and blog posts where people say the same thing. And that's, I struggle with that because I also have read the cognitive science and writer's block, but then strangely, I realized they were saying the same thing. So the resistance I had is like, I know I instruct on writer's block. I do workshops. I have people that I'm like, okay, just take a blank piece of paper and just write blah, blah, blah. Just write any words you can think of just to get it started. And they find themselves unable to do even that.
Yeah.
And then for me,
really,
oh yes,
no blah blah blah.
They won't. They won't do it. This is called writing avoidance sometimes. Okay. Other times, I was writing an article. I knew what I wanted to write. I at least in my own mind, an expert in the subject area. I wanted to write the article. I knew what I had to say next, and I was so paralyzed. I actually lay down on the floor in a building in this very campus, staring at the ceiling, going, because I could not force the words onto the page. And this is after I've already written, 800,000 words in Nano. And so I'm like, so writer's block, it's real. Yet, most people, when they have writer's block, and this comes out in all the studies, is they're filled with all these, some people are blocked emotionally, but most of the time, it's from having rules. It's from having a habit to wait for your muse, to wait for inspiration. Another big one is editing, where you become convinced that you must write perfectly on the page, and that made me think of what you're saying as far as that rough draft is. We talk a little bit about your inner writer and your inner editor.
Yeah. In fact, I do have a chapter here about the inner editor. I'll read a little bit. Does anyone know what an inner editor is? Do you have any guesses, hazards? Elizabeth, you're laughing at your inner editor here. Big jerk. I like that. Anything else? Anybody else?
It's like inner critic.
Inner critic. Yeah. That person who's saying, I like the big jerk one, because I do think sometimes that inner editor is saying, you're not a writer. Why are you doing this? Why are you being so pretentious to think that you can write a novel? Or the inner critic is more, I think, what I was talking about earlier, where, I'll write a sentence and it'll be like, that's just a crappy, banal sentence. Your favorite writers can write that much more, eloquently and lyrically. But the inner editor plays a big role in NaNoWriMo in the sense that it's all about banishing the inner editor. And that's probably, the slide here is the power of writing with abandon. And so it's about saying, inner editor, you can't be here this month. That's a really easy to say, hard to do, because our inner editors are powerful figures. But we say that, like banish your inner editor for a month and just write, and write with abandon. And part of the premise of that is that when you write with abandon, you are going to discover ideas and take creative risks in ways that you can't even imagine. That's one of the reasons I do NaNoWriMo every year. I came to NaNoWriMo as a writer before I became executive director. And getting that rough draft out and exploring my ideas, because the rough draft in so many ways is just an exploratory draft. It's not meant to ossify into the structure of your novel necessarily. I recently heard this quote by Barbara Kingsolver, where when she starts writing a novel, she starts at page -100. And so she's writing those first 100 pages just to kind of find her story. And that's the way I view my rough draft. I'm just finding my story. I think Anthony maybe has his more structured going in. And I mention that just because everyone has a different approach to writing, and that NaNoWriMo, as creators, we have to constantly be experimenting with our approach.
I was on a writing panel once, and we went down the list, and everyone described themselves as being plotters versus pantsers, people who were plotting ahead. And we got to the last person on the list, who was Diana Gabaldon, who wrote Outlander. And she's like, well, I don't want the audience to be misled, because it seems like we're, like 3/4 of this one type of person, but the average statistics are the opposite of this. right? So everyone is different and everyone is
Yeah.
unique.
Yeah, and I think, every year I do something different. I'm more of like what we call in NaNoWriMo terms a plantser. I'm in between a planner or plotter and a pantser. This is kind of how I describe my life. I never go too far into any one camp. So anyway, it works for me though to find that middle ground. So this chapter is actually about improvisational writing, which NaNoWriMo largely is. But I think it connects with the inner editor really well as well. Your inner editor has a sibling who can be more dangerous to your writing than even the growling critiques of your inner editor itself. It tends to walk around the rooms of your mind, gazing at all the imaginative ruckus with a persnickety, arrogant gaze. It exudes an air of judicious logic, speaking in the grave tones of seasoned caution. It likes to stroll in just when you get an idea that you're about to pounce on like a puppy pounces on its chew toy, and it says, "But wait. But wait, this isn't logical. But wait, that's unpleasant. But wait, let's just not go there." I think of "but wait" as an unenthusiastic drip, the kind of person who sits smugly in meetings and never quite gets behind an idea for whatever reason. The killjoy who lacks the oomph or the wonderful reckless zeal that brings ideas to life. But wait is a volcano that will never erupt. But wait has never led to great artistic or scientific breakthroughs, although it comes in handy if you're an impulsive shopper. But wait is quite different than its twin, but wait, what if? A wonderfully stimulating thought partner. If your brain has fallen into a rut of resistance, a storage bin of hand-me-down ideas and shop-worn sensibilities, it's necessary to find ways to open it up to new, sense-ravishing possibilities. If I'm feeling too many but waits in my mind, I try to embrace the opposite force, the guiding principle of improv. Yes, and. It's simple, really. Improv actors are trained to trust the impulsive force of an idea and just say yes to it. They accept whatever fellow actors offer in a scene instead of stiff-arming the action in the direction they want it to go. For example, when one actor says it's so cold in here, you don't say, "But wait, that's not a good approach to the scene," or "But wait, I'm not cold." You take the statement and build on it. "Yes, nudity brings on the chills," you say, or something silly. And then your acting partner, thank you for laughing. And then your acting partner embraces your statement and builds on that. When I'm writing, I sometimes like to think that there's an entire writing team in my head tossing ideas back and forth, a veritable comedy troupe. But wait hates scenes like this, everyone getting ideas, loving their ideas, putting their ideas into the world, onto the page in such a sloppy, gleeful way. But wait tries to speak above the fray. But once the naturally boisterous writing team in your brain gets going, but wait's cranky little voice just isn't loud enough. Improvisers take risks and make mistakes by definition. They let themselves fall into the most foolish behavior, allow themselves to speak what's taboo, because that's what leads them in fresh directions and helps them connect with their audiences. And so I just want to say that part of that, like taking risks, is what a novel or any creative endeavor is really all about, and accepting. For novelists, you're really accepting so much failure in that first draft. There's so much of it. I think I have a slide when we get to the workshop portion, but Karen Russell, the novelist, says that 90% of her rough draft doesn't make it into her final draft. Almost every novelist I've talked to, that's the case. And so the rough draft really is a sandbox, a playground.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a chance for you to try ideas, and then later you may find they may not work. If you write slightly out of order, like I do, the pieces may not fit. But until you've got all the pieces down, you can't figure out where you're going to have to lay that highway.
Yeah.
Keith Johnstone has a great book called Impro, which talks about some of the stuff that with improv that you're talking about. And I find the ideas great, but when I've been on the improv stage, I often kind of find myself freezing up.
Yeah.
And because I haven't done improv enough. And this goes back to what we were talking about that blank page and writer's block. If you think about when you start to write, you have to know why you're writing, what you're writing about, what words you want to choose. You have to be familiar with your tools, whether it's a typewriter or a laptop or a pen. And we have this, we have a limited number of things we can store in our heads, and our working memories. 7 plus or minus 2 is the old cognitive science saw. And that's not quite accurate, but it's a first cut. And when you have all these skills that you haven't practiced competing with each other, you can get jammed. And that's one of the theories why the blank page writer's block happens. And the way around it is to do what we do in the rest of our lives, is to practice enough that all those skills go into our subconscious, become automatic, and then we can just focus on what we want to write, and we can let the muse take off.
Yeah.
So to do that, you have to write. It's like to do improv, you have to not just read impro, you have to go do improv.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies that we can use to, help us keep that writing practice going even when we feel, like we can't?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning practice, because I do think this is easier said than done. Like the improvisation metaphor. Yeah, if you do that every day, like you did NaNoWriMo, you would build those muscles in your brain, and it would become effortless in some ways, I think. So practice is really key. One of the chapters I really like in this book to help people face that blank page, it's an exercise that comes from Ray Bradbury. When he first decided to become a writer and a novelist, he did this exercise where he would write down 20 nouns. And he'd do it entirely randomly, just from his subconscious. And then he would write what he called pensees, little thoughts or little tiny essays about each word. And they would be like 100 words to 200 words. And in that process of just the random nouns and then, putting his thoughts to them, he came up with some of his best stories and novels. I think A Wicked Thing This Way Comes. That's how he came up with the idea for that.
Something Wicked This Way.
Something Wicked This Way Comes. Yeah, I always stumble on that title.
Yeah.
But this is all to say that, I do think that writer's block is often something we tell ourselves, and it becomes an excuse. There's a mythology built around it. And I think that if you think about what techniques will help you get words on the page, like whether it's Ray Bradbury's or a simple phrase, like sometimes we give just a phrase as a writing prompt, or use photographs that you find on the internet, or I've known people who write letters to their main character, or have their main character write them letters to themselves. There are a lot of different ways to do an end run about whatever that is, that psychological block. And then I still think once you get those words on the page, they create a momentum that is mysterious. And that's why, like, when we do these word sprints during NaNoWriMo, oftentimes you'll get the prompt. You won't have a story that you're writing. You'll just have to write as many words as you can in 5 minutes. And it's always it's just this huge mystery and surprise how words just kind of come pouring out, and they make this interesting sense. And they lead to a story. Even when you don't think you have a story, there's a story in there.
Yeah, you can really sometimes just start with, something you don't know where it's going, and then suddenly it becomes something.
Yeah.
And both of the novel series I work on, there's a section, I can point to you a section which came out of just kind of, I had ideas that I wanted to write something, but the section that just wrote itself, and then everything else came out of that spark that got into that world. And then sometimes, as I'm taking in that spark, it's like, okay, do I really want to do this? And fortunately, because I write, slightly over the top genre fiction, it's really easy for me to take the, but wait guy and say, every time I hear that, I'm like, if I say like, oh wait, should I really do this? The answer is, oh yes, do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't work, but most of the time it's best to follow that impulse.
And you learn that impulse to say no, but wait.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, through writing, right?
Right.
And through hearing that voice and then figuring out, but that voice isn't guiding me to better stories, But that's the practice part.
And it comes out of the practice and the pushing things through to conclusion. Sometimes where I'm like, should I do this? And I put like 3 or 4 ideas into a story. I think it was on my second novel. One of those story plots arcs had to disappear, but the other 3 were solid. Mm-hmm. And it's like the thing I wasn't going to put in there became the thing that I had to do. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes that writing, you get it down there, you're happy with it that moment. Sometimes you're happy about editing. I would be happy if I finished the series that I'm writing, which is rather long. But one of the moments that I really liked was when I was at a convention and someone came up to me and said, I read your your book, and I was delighted to find out that your character is like me, and because no one had written that for her, and so that, in a way, even if I never finished the series, that moment of a reader's delight was a real moment of success for me.
Yeah.
And that's something else you talk about in your book, is like how we define success.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I get asked most frequently is how many people, like, what do you do with all these novels? Sometimes at its most disparaging, it's asked like that. And so this year for National Novel Writing Month, we'll have possibly 350,000 people sign up to write novels. And we have a consistent, relatively consistent, about 15% of them will finish. So what is that? That's about close to 50,000 novels. And so the question is, when they say, what do you do with all these novels? The reason I call it disparaging is that I think behind that question, people think that every novel has to have the goal of being published, or that every novel, it's making a novel into a product, right? Like, why do this if you're not going to make money from it? But NaNoWriMo exists in part, in large part, to awaken people's creativity and to be creative for the sake of being creative. And I think of sometimes like if you started knitting and you told a friend that you were starting to knit, they wouldn't say, "Oh, are you going to open up a sweater shop?" Like, they wouldn't take it to that end goal. And I think you could say, "I'm taking guitar lessons," and you wouldn't ask me, "Oh, are you going to form a rock band and try to get top 40 hits?" I think you can play the guitar and knit and just enjoy it as an activity in itself. And the same with writing. And that's not to say that, I have goals of publishing, and I welcome bestseller lists if they find their way to me. But I also think that there's a deeper gift in writing, and that's what I really like to observe. And let me read, this is the final chapter of the book. And maybe we should take questions after
Yeah, I
this,
was
actually.
thinking that.
Yeah. In fact, I won't read. What if, what if we take questions now? I just noticed we only have 20 minutes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
15 minutes, actually. So
15 minutes. So why don't I skip the reading, and because I'd love to answer your questions.
Yeah, so we have a mic, so if you'd like to...
And I hear that David will give anybody who asks a question a free book. And he has 20 books. So
You must enter to win.
Hi there.
Where's my book?
Very meta.
I've been doing NaNoWriMo for quite some time, but I'm one of those people you call a rebel who's been doing kind of... I did the same novel over and over. Then I abandoned it to write a bunch of short stories. I have had some published locally, which is kind of nice. I put some, bundled a few together and put them on Kindle. But how do you feel about... if I'm going to do NaNoWriMo again, I'm wondering, should I go back to my old novel, or maybe I should start a new one, or?
So this is a really, it's tough for me every year to decide what I'm going to do in NaNoWriMo. I've also been a rebel. Sometimes I need to revise one of those novels I didn't quite get to from years ago. Time, I can't keep up with time. But my short answer is to write what stories tend to attract you, and sometimes they attract you equally, but write what you're most passionate about. So if you want to go back and revise, think about, am I going to be passionate about that project? Am I going to be really energetic? Do I want to wake up and see it every day? Because I think there's something really important about working on something, not just to get it finished, but to work about, I don't think we should abandon things because they will get hard. The finishing part is difficult. But I would try to identify what's calling you. And I think that can be a really mysterious question. And sometimes you can't decide it and you just have to choose a project.
I think that's pretty good advice. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I usually, try to take the next project in my queue and push it forward to conclusion, because I've seen a number of people that once you reach that concluding point on a book, it's like an almost magical sense of perspective on what you've done that helps you figure out where you're going to go next with it. But then I know a lot of other writers that are just they go right up to that moment and they're like, what is calling to me? And I know a very prolific author, and he's written many books, and she has gotten 10,000 words into something and said, this story isn't speaking to me, and tries to switch gears and just write the other words in some other project.
Yeah.
So it's got to figure out what works for you, but Nano's also a challenge. So figure out how you can use it to help challenge yourself while everyone else is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Let's have some more. Yeah.
Thanks for this. This is cool.
Oh, good.
I guess this is actually related to the last question. I have a real problem of writing like a lot to the point where I'm like just about done and then being like, eh. Like, and it's stuff that I like would like to submit, or like even I'll submit it and then it gets rejected and then I'm like, eh. Like, do you have any advice around doing that last like 5% in terms of like motivating yourself, like something that you are excited about and you're just like kind of done writing and like
Yeah.
maybe like nano.
Are these
edit
like
mode?
novels that you've written?
No, like short stories or essays, even
Like
like
short
stuff
stories,
that's like pretty short.
But you just
Yeah,
want to like think about how to finish them. Like
Yeah.
Like you're the type of marathon runner who quits at the 23-mile mark and goes for the Gatorade, or
no, I don't know actually.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm joking.
No,
No, I think finishing it is super tough, and the reason I was questioning my answer previously there was that sometimes if you choose to write only what you're passionate about, you might be leaving projects before you're finished. So it really becomes this question of do I want to? What are my goals with this project? Do I really want to finish it? If I want to finish it, do I want to revise it enough that I can submit it for publication or give it to a friend to read? So I mean, in the end, it's finishing really is about your goals. I mean, a lot of it is in the chapter I didn't read there. Like, how do you define success? And if you want to make it to bestseller lists, then you're going to have to think about all those rounds of revision and the willpower, because it does take willpower. Writing a novel, I mean, and the reason I brought up the marathon too, writing a novel is a marathon. NaNoWriMo is a marathon unto itself for a month, but then going beyond that and revising, it gets very tough. And every writer has those moments where you're looking at the project, and you're just full of self-doubt, or you're exhausted, and you're like, why am I doing this? Does this even matter? I mean, I spent 10 years on one novel that I guess I've finished it in the sense that it's gone through numerous drafts, but I haven't finished it in that it's solid enough for me to publish or submit, really. But I also have decided, I don't know, maybe I will return to this. There's part of me that's decided it's just necessary to leave it behind. It's not, and this is to say, it's not calling me anymore, despite all that, the wasted thousands of hours I put into it. But we'll see. So I think there are all these like crazy decision points in finishing a novel. Yeah, but it's a gift when you're finished with it. It feels so good to have seen it all the way through.
Yeah, those hours weren't wasted.
They weren't wasted
because they
no.
were.
Yeah, you're right. I totally went against my message points there. They weren't wasted because I was learning from them.
Yeah.
And every novel is a new novel. Like, that's the thing. Novelists, it's always new. It's always a new challenge to carry off a novel, no matter what it is. So I hope that all those missteps I took previously are helping me now.
Yeah, and for everything that I've published, anything that I've written that is more than 3,000 or 5,000 words long, every single one of those, there was some point where I wanted to quit and say, okay, this isn't calling me to me anymore, even when I was close to the end. So you're not alone, and if it's calling to you, you will reach a point where you want to stop. But if you're this close, just go for it.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, and then I want to hear the next two questions, definitely. Ray Bradbury said to become a good writer, you have to write several 100,000 throwaway words. I've heard people say 1 million. I don't know. Anyway, the premise is you got to practice a lot. So, yeah, keep writing. How about you?
Yeah, hey, thanks for being here. I learned a lot
Great.
from this. So I was surprised. One of the things I learned was what you said about Toni Morrison, how she spent 15 minutes each evening. And you gave the example of, like, if you took 30 minutes, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, you could have a novel, if not two. How do you, with those little increments daily, create a cohesive story? I mean, in my mind, by the time I've started writing, 15 minutes have passed, and I'm just kind of getting in the flow.
Yeah.
Can you speak
Well,
more to that?
keep in the flow.
Yeah.
If you're in the flow and have momentum, keep going, definitely. I mean, in terms of like how you stitch together a whole novel, I mean, people have a lot of different. Every novelist kind of has a different approach, I think. And I know, like back to the planning. Some novelists I know, they plan their novels so meticulously before they write it. I mean, they have really detailed outlines. They have software that helps them do a timeline. They really get into the thinking it through, and that helps them write, and that's great. That doesn't help me write. When I write an outline, I feel like I get pigeonholed. My story idea becomes rigid. I have a hard time breaking out of that. So I feel like I'm writing more towards the outline and not enough towards the story. So I just need an idea of where the story is going, kind of its direction or its trajectory, and then I write towards that. And that's because I like to write for the mysteries of my characters and the story, and I think that happens without an outline, for me at least. If you're writing in 15-minute increments a day, though, and if you haven't outlined your novel, I would say you could trust that you're creating a momentum with that every day. And the reason I say the good thing about doing that every day is if you do that once every 2 weeks, you're not really creating momentum. But if you do it every day, there's something happening in your brain, whereas right now, somewhere in your brain, you'll be thinking about that story or when you go to sleep tonight. And I think that is a valuable, and that's, again, a premise of this book, of the reason there's 52 essays. It's just keep being creative year-round, and it will build into something bigger.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming. How do you balance brevity? How do you trade off between a high level of detail, more of a sense of a real-time flow versus getting, more quickly through the plot, getting past boring bits, etc.?
Yeah, it's, I'm sure every writer has a different approach to this as well, but for me, at least within the NaNoWriMo framework, part of the making the perfect sentence, which I think you were alluding to, and that's great. Sometimes writing the perfect sentence can give you momentum to keep going, and you can feel your story better. I at least personally got too hung up on creating the perfect sentence before going on. And so NaNoWriMo, the reason I like it is because it is this, the point of every word is progress, and to see, to reach that end point in one draft. And for me at least, I need that. It might be. I mean, it is for me a way of exploring the plot line of the story, in a way that I can't do it with an outline. So it gets to be that kind of struggle with the inner editor, I think, where it's that practice, at least for me, to banish the inner editor and to favor progress. I'm not sure if I'm getting to your question. Am I?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I'm supposed to know all this stuff already, so I don't really have.
No writer knows all the stuff.
So I'm going to throw you a softball, both you guys actually. What is the thing that you are that you most look forward to every year with National Novel Writing Month? I always feel like it's kind of like a festival almost, right? I look forward to it every year. But what is the thing about it that you're most looking forward to? What is the thing about it that you most struggle with, or that you anticipate you're going to struggle with? And then have you decided what you're going to write?
So looking forward to, most struggle with, and what I'm going to write. Can I let Anthony hasn't talked in a while? Can I let you go?
Okay. What I'm looking forward to is there's this real tension between the moment where I submit my final word count. Oh, thank God I made it. Because that has been actually on 11 o'clock on last night from time. And then there's an event called the Night of Writing Dangerously, which is a big just celebration of Nano, and that's a really fun event. What I struggle with most is there's this point, doesn't happen every time, but my life gets in the way, and I don't start right on time, and then I end up 5,000 or 10,000 words behind, and I am behind, and I reach this point where I hit the 25,000 word mark, and I'm 5 days or even 10 days behind, and I'm oh my gosh, the month is almost up, and then I have to go into this crunch, and that's the thing that I dread and try to avoid by trying to get started earlier. And the project I'm working on is called Botnet. It's the second book. So I have a adult series about Dakota Frost, a magical tattoo artist, and she's adopted a were-tiger child called Cinnamon Frost, and I'm writing the second young adult book for Nano.
Cool. I think the thing I'm looking forward to is, at least most Nanos when I'm starting a new project, this kind of gets into the third answer here, but the start of a new novel, there is something, it's a gift to have an idea for a novel and to write the first words of it and to get it out of the chute and into the world. It's just a kind of magical feeling, I think. The biggest challenge actually happens about like week 2. You know, like I follow the typical trajectory of most NaNoWriters, where out of the gate that first week you're just like, the words are gushing. You feel so good about the story. You have so much momentum. But the second and third weeks can be really grueling. I call them the muddy middle of NaNoWriMo, where you're literally kind of walking through a swamp, and it's super tough to keep going. And per what Anthony was saying about like when you fall behind on your word count, it is inevitable that in the month of November you will get sick. You will have a big project at work. Something will happen. There's just something about the month of November that attracts these things, and but the thing is not to let that getting behind affect your writing. Like the premise of our event is like we want people to write, and we want them to keep writing. So if you can't hit 50,000 words, if you only hit 25,000 words, go for that. You know, the main thing is to get your novel, you know, going. I have so many people come up to me and say, I only wrote 10,000 words during November. Well, there's no only to 10,000 words. That's a lot of words to write. And let me think. Your third question was, what am I writing?
Just have you decided? You don't
Have I decided? You know what? I have not decided. This is a crazy year. I'm thinking about going back to a novel I started over the summer, and I have 5,000 words on it. I want to start something new, but I also want to finish that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Only one more question? We talked too much. We can do 2. We'll go really fast.
Thanks. Arguably, your whole talk has been about this, but in case you have anything in particular, I used to try to write every once in a while. I'd find a story which I do, and I would, but mostly I'm a perfectionist. I would just sit there. I can't write anything that isn't perfect, and
Yeah.
I could do that for hours. So, do you have anything which would address that?
About the writing, or you're really
And
embracing
beyond that.
your inner editor.
Yeah.
You know what? I would get really messy. I would do the opposite of your inclinations. Like if you're a neat freak kid, I would go out and just jump in a mud puddle. I have a chapter in this book actually, which it's more about embracing the absurd or the surreal. But I think like sometimes, or to be more playful. Like there is a like kind of playful spirit to kids finger painting and getting messy too. And so I think I'd practice that. I think I'd practice being playful and getting messy. And then just that general practice, like building that muscle of banishing the inner editor. Right. And write with abandon. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I feel like you know, getting playful is probably the best thing that you can do for that. And the most analytical writing instructors you find will tell you need to put aside your inner editor, because you can't edit with the speed that you can speak and create. Editing is done consciously. Writing inspiration comes from the flow of your subconscious, and you need to just let it rip.
I'll mention one exercise, Julia Cameron. She's a kind of writing guru, creative guru, and she says that morning papers is what she calls them. You know about them?
Morning pages, yeah.
Morning pages, yeah. You just write anything, 2 or 3 pages, or for 20 minutes. I can't remember how she defines it, but that would help. Do we have time for one more question? One more, okay.
Yes, I made it.
Good.
Yeah, just was really curious, like what you guys think makes a great writer. I mean, anyone can write, but what makes what makes you stand out? And then secondly, what is your favorite novel or book?
Gosh, that first question. Do you have a whole semester? We can explore that. I mean, so I'll give you a short definition. And this is in relation to all the like how to write great suspense, how to write a great plot, how to write great dialogue. There are hundreds of books on that subject. And they all matter. Like writing craft does matter to writing a good story. But I think what matters more than that is a story where the author makes him or herself vulnerable on the page and really connects with the reader heart to heart. And so it's that heart-to-heart connection about a story that you can relate to and that really gives you meaning in your life that makes that novel great. And it's great in your mind, right? That's all that matters. It doesn't have to be considered great by whatever, a whole panel of judges or something. So that's my short answer. And then let me see, your second question was?
Favorite book.
Oh, my favorite book. You know, that is a single most impossible question to answer. I mean, I really do have hundreds of favorite books, and they're probably all equivalent. strangely enough, you asked that just in last Sunday's San Francisco Chronicle, in their book review section, I was asked to tell about my most treasured book, which is a book called Under the Volcano. And the reason I just had to come up with one for the sake of the article, but it's a treasured book in the sense of like when I read it in my life and what it meant during that period in my life. And it was Under the Volcano, which is just one of the craziest novels ever written too. It's a really wonderful novel. Yeah.
So, let's see. So I'm going to steal someone else's. I don't remember who to attribute this to. That writers write, good writers write about what they love. Great writers make other people love what they love.
Good.
And I think if you can move people, you're a great writer, and it all depends on what genre or area you're aiming for, and there's different criteria for that. As for the best book, I could easily list, half a dozen, from Ulysses to Atlas Shrugged to Ringworld. The two that leap to mind most are short would be Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway, and long form would be American Gods by Neil Gaiman, or possibly Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon.
Mm-hmm.
So I got like 6 in there instead of
Yeah, you covered some genres. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming. I think we have a writing workshop now for 45 minutes. And also, I'm happy to sign. I don't know if we have time for me to sign books too. Does that happen at the end of the 45-minute workshop? Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much. These are great questions.
All right,
Really
thank you for
appreciate guys
coming.
out. Yeah, thank you for your great questions. Yeah.